The Titanic's drunken survivor, a miracle in the ice-cold Atlantic. When the mighty Titanic struck an iceberg on April 14, 1912, panic spread as the unsinkable ship began its tragic descent. Passengers fought for lifeboats, the freezing Atlantic waiting to claim over 1,500 souls. But amidst the chaos, one man faced death in the most unexpected way: by getting drunk. Charles Joughin, the Titanic's chief baker, defied the odds. As others froze within minutes, he swam for hours in the icy waters, surviving when almost no one else could. How did he do it? Was it luck, resilience, or did whiskey truly save his life? This is the unbelievable true story of the Titanic's forgotten hero, the man who stepped into the ocean and lived to tell the tale. A night of luxury turns to chaos. The RMS Titanic, the largest and most luxurious ship of its time, set sail on April 10, 1912, from Southampton, England, bound for New York City. Dubbed the unsinkable ship, it was a marvel of modern engineering, boasting grand staircases, lavish dining halls, and state-of-the-art safety features. The wealthiest passengers dined in elegance, while those in third class held on to dreams of a better life in America. For 4 days, the Titanic sailed smoothly across the Atlantic, carrying over 2,200 passengers and crew, all unaware of the disaster that awaited them. Among the crew was Charles Joughin, the ship's chief baker. A hard-working, no-nonsense man, Joughin was in charge of the ship's massive bakery operations, ensuring that thousands of passengers were fed daily. As a senior crew member, he had his own cabin, far removed from the chaos of the lower decks. On the night of April 14, 1912, he had just retired to his quarters after a long day of work when he felt a sudden, strange vibration run through the ship. It wasn't the usual movement of the ocean. This was something different. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic had struck an iceberg. The collision was silent, almost unnoticeable to those asleep in their cabins. But beneath the surface, the impact had ripped open 5 of the ship's watertight compartments, dooming the vessel. While some passengers barely stirred, believing nothing was wrong, experienced crew members like Joughin knew the situation could be serious. Instead of panicking, he did what he knew best. He got to work. Joughin immediately sprang into action, ordering his team of bakers to bring bread and provisions to the lifeboats so that survivors would have food. As chaos erupted on deck, he remained calm, helping passengers board lifeboats. He refused to take a seat himself, believing that others, especially women and children, needed to escape first. All around him, people scrambled, desperate to survive. The mighty Titanic was sinking and time was running out. As the realization set in that he might not make it out alive, Joughin made a fateful decision, one that would unknowingly save his life in the coming hours. He returned to his cabin and drank an entire bottle of whiskey, preparing for the worst. Preparing for the inevitable. As the Titanic continued its slow but unstoppable descent into the Atlantic, Charles Joughin faced a terrifying reality. There was no way off the ship. The lifeboats were nearly gone, and hundreds of passengers were still trapped on board. But instead of surrendering to fear, he chose to remain calm, doing what little he could to help. He roamed the decks, assisting passengers into the last lifeboats, knowing he would not be getting into one himself. As the ship tilted further into the ocean, the panic intensified. People were screaming, crying, and pushing in desperate attempts to find safety. Joughin, however, remained eerily composed. He later recalled seeing men attempting to launch collapsible lifeboats, fighting against time and the ship's increasing tilt. Despite the chaos, Joughin stayed behind, feeling a strange acceptance of his fate. Realizing that the Titanic's final moments were approaching, he made an unusual decision. He returned to his cabin and drank an entire bottle of whiskey. Perhaps it was a farewell drink, a last indulgence before the inevitable. But what he didn't know was that this act would play a crucial role in his survival. The alcohol numbed his senses, keeping him from succumbing to the sheer terror and freezing temperatures that would soon engulf him. As the stern of the Titanic lifted high into the night sky, the ship groaned under its own weight. Joughin, rather than panicking, moved toward the very edge of the ship. He climbed over the rail, calmly waiting for the moment the ship would go under. Then, as the Titanic snapped in half and plunged into the sea, he did something extraordinary. He didn't jump. He simply stepped off into the freezing Atlantic. While those around him thrashed in icy shock, Joughin remained afloat, his head never even fully submerging. He was now in the deadliest waters on Earth, where most people would perish within minutes. But somehow, he kept going. Pause for a moment and support the channel by liking and subscribing. Now, let's dive back into this amazing story. A battle against death. As Charles Joughin entered the frigid Atlantic, the reality of his situation set in. The water was an unimaginable 28 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 2 degrees Celsius, cold enough to cause shock, unconsciousness, and death in minutes. All around him, people thrashed and screamed, their bodies quickly succumbing to the icy grip of the ocean. Most would not last longer than 15 minutes before hypothermia took hold. Yet Joughin remained afloat, defying the odds in one of history's deadliest maritime disasters. Unlike many others, Joughin did not struggle or panic. He later recalled that, unlike the rest, he never even felt particularly cold. The whiskey in his system had numbed his body, preventing him from feeling the initial shock of the freezing water. While alcohol is usually dangerous in extreme cold, causing blood vessels to dilate and increasing heat loss, in Joughin's case, it kept him calm and moving, likely preventing immediate cold shock. Instead of flailing or trying to climb onto debris, Joughin continued swimming, a move that kept his body from becoming completely motionless and freezing. While others succumbed to exhaustion, he kicked and paddled, keeping himself warm through sheer movement. In the dark waters, he witnessed the horror around him. Dozens of passengers clinging to whatever they could, many falling silent as hypothermia set in. Bodies floated lifelessly past him. The night was filled with the eerie silence of those who had perished. Joughin eventually found a piece of floating debris, but unlike the famous door from Titanic lore, he did not climb onto it. Instead, he simply held onto it, using it as support while keeping most of his body in the water. His endurance was nothing short of miraculous. While many others lost consciousness, Joughin remained alert, awake, and aware of his surroundings. For nearly 2 hours he battled the freezing Atlantic, his body pushing past its limits. The Titanic had long disappeared beneath the waves, and now the survivors were left drifting, hoping for rescue. Joughin had no lifeboat, no guarantee of survival, just his determination and a stroke of inexplicable luck. Against all logic, he was still alive. A miraculous rescue. As the cold, dark Atlantic stretched endlessly around him, Charles Joughin continued to cling to life. The freezing water had already claimed hundreds of victims, their bodies now eerily silent, floating in the vast ocean. But Joughin, against all odds, was still moving. His legs and arms burned with exhaustion, but he refused to stop. Every kick, every paddle was a fight against the deadly cold. Time seemed to slow, but eventually he spotted hope in the distance. An overturned lifeboat. It was Collapsible Lifeboat B, one of the last boats launched from the Titanic, now floating upside down with several survivors clinging to it. Driven by sheer willpower, Joughin swam toward the lifeboat, his body pushed to its limits after nearly 2 hours in the freezing ocean. When he finally reached the lifeboat, he found that it was already overcrowded with desperate survivors. There was no room for him to climb aboard, But that didn't stop him. Instead, he held onto the side, gripping the wooden frame with frozen fingers. He was so numb from the cold that he could no longer feel pain, yet he never lost consciousness, a feat nearly unheard of in such extreme conditions. The survivors on the lifeboat helped keep him afloat, ensuring he did not slip beneath the waves like so many others. Though he remained in the water, his determination kept him going. The minutes dragged into what felt like eternity as the group waited for rescue, their bodies battered by the icy wind and water. Then, at daybreak, salvation finally arrived. The RMS Carpathia, responding to the Titanic's distress calls, appeared on the horizon, navigating carefully through the wreckage and scattered survivors. One by one, lifeboats were rescued, their occupants pulled aboard. Joughin, still remarkably conscious despite his ordeal, was among the last to be saved. When rescuers pulled him from the water, they were stunned. Not only had he survived hours in the freezing ocean, but he suffered no serious injuries beyond swollen feet. Against all odds, Charles Joughin had outlived the Titanic and the Atlantic's deadly grip. He had stepped into the ocean with no expectations of survival. Yet, through luck, resilience, and perhaps even the effects of whiskey, he had become one of the most remarkable survivors of the Titanic disaster. Life after the Titanic. Despite surviving one of the greatest maritime disasters in history, Charles Joughin did not seek fame or recognition. Once aboard the RMS Carpathia, he was given medical attention. But to everyone's surprise, he suffered only swollen feet. A miracle, considering he had spent nearly 2 hours in the freezing Atlantic. While many survivors were in shock or mourning the loss of loved ones, Joughin seemed almost unbothered. He even later claimed that he never felt cold during the entire ordeal, an assertion that baffles historians and scientists to this day. After arriving in New York, Joughin quietly resumed his life. He continued working as a baker on ships, showing no fear of returning to sea. He later served as a baker for the U.S. Merchant Marine during World War II, continuing his career despite experiencing one of the worst naval disasters in history. Unlike other survivors who struggled with trauma, Joughin never showed signs of fear of the ocean. His resilience was truly remarkable. For years, his extraordinary survival story remained relatively unknown. While other survivors shared their dramatic tales, Joughin's matter-of-fact attitude made his story seem almost unreal. It wasn't until later retellings of the Titanic's sinking that his legend grew, often exaggerated to almost mythical proportions. Some even joked that whiskey made him invincible. But in reality, it was his composure, stamina, and sheer will to survive that saved him. Joughin eventually retired in New Jersey, living a quiet life far from the tragedy that had once defined him. He passed away in 1956 at the age of 78, leaving behind one of the most astonishing survival stories of the Titanic disaster. While others froze within minutes, he swam through the Atlantic and lived to tell the tale. His story remains a testament to human resilience, unexpected heroism, and the strange, unpredictable nature of survival. Today, Charles Joughin is remembered as the drunken baker who outlasted the Atlantic, but his survival was no accident. It was a combination of bravery, endurance, and an unbreakable spirit. This was just one of many incredible moments in history. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you never miss another one.